Hello there, this is Mazzy, and this is going to be interesting. I can't promise I'm not going to show any bias. Let's see how this goes. The Beatles versus the Stones. A dilemma, a question that's been plaguing mankind since 1965 probably. It's funny how, people will ask you, at least I know things have changed now with different generations passing, but they would ask, what are you into? What's your sign? Where are you from? What are your favorite foods? What's your favorite music? But the thing that asks you in the 60s, 70s, even beyond to the 80s, and even today, Beatles or Stones. It wouldn't be the Beatles, Rolling Stones, just Beatles or Stones. What kind of person are you? Are you a Beatle fan, the cute mop tops that had cute, wonderful suits, matching suits? With the screaming girls, teeny bopper stuff? Or are you a Stones fan, which is dark and gritty and urban and bulging, sweaty, sexuality? They were from Richmond. They were a little more, to be honest with you, the Stones were a little more suburban and a little closer to middle class, where the Stones were lower class. The Beatles were lower class. The Beatles were playing sweaty, dank, dark clubs in Liverpool and in Hamburg for years and years and years. So anyway, I'm going to showcase a portion of my collection of Beatles and a portion of my collection of Stones. The main part of this video is going to be the mono records from the 60s, from pretty much from the UK point of view. As I grew up in San Francisco, an American, I pretty much got most of these records, the US versions, at least in the 60s, as they were coming out. Later I went back and I got it maybe in 68, 69. I started getting a few imports of the Beatles and then the other artists. But I do love the Rolling Stones. And of course, I'm a big Beatles collector and have a lot of Stones albums, but I'm not a completist. That's a long intro, but this is going to be a fucking long video. Click the not kids box. Now, first of all, the basis of the showcase, some of you probably know, will be the mono box that came out, 2012, 13, I think. The mono reissues, remastered from all analog. Pretty nice. Look at a beautiful white box, a white mono box. The stereo box that they did, which was not analog, was black. Then, the Rolling Stones put out a mono box. It's white. What a fucking coincidence! The Stones put a white box out. Mono box. I think all analog. What a coincidence, huh? Anyway, I'll go year by year and tell little stories. But the first year, the Beatles put out Please Please Me. I won't get into details because I just did an overview of rating my favorite Beatles album. So Please Please Me, 1963. What did the Stones put out? Oh, shit. I don't know if I'm going to get the hang of this. If this kind of dissolves into not putting the hat, and there's no coincidence, just happened to do a white good guy's hat for the Beatles and a dark bad guy's hat for the Stones. I don't mean anything about it. It's 1963, the Beatles. Stones put out nothing. Okay, 1964. Beatles put, with the Beatles, also 1964. Stones, nothing. Okay, who's ahead? Are we keeping score? Now, 1960, I'm sorry, that was 1963. Did I already screw this up? If I did, I'm not starting over. That was 1963. 1964, That's when the Beatles come to America. The Beatles put out A Hard Day's Night. Not till July, but in April, the Stones put out the Rolling Stones. Finally, they make a record. Okay, this came out just before Hard Day's Night. So, black background, in silhouette, in shading. Coincidence? All covers, great covers. Route 66, Mona, I'm a King Bee, Carol. All covers, not one original. Okay. The Beatles put out, also in 1964, Beatles for Sale. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 originals, no covers. Okay, so this is fun. Are you having fun yet? Oh, God, I didn't. Okay, we're losing the hat thing. I'm gonna keep one hat. That didn't go. That didn't go well. I had planned on switching hats, but that's kind of like a gimmicky thing, and you know, Mazzy doesn't do gimmicks in these videos here. So sorry about that. So let's. Okay, 1965. I do have a cheat sheet just so I get every album of that point. Oh, but the end of '64. The end of '64. All of a sudden, one day, Andrew Loog Oldham. Andrew Loog Oldham, you should know that name. He was the manager and producer of the Rolling Stones in the early days. Bon vivant, hipster, cool character, and he had worked for Brian Epstein, who was the Beatles manager. He left Brian Epstein, wanted his own band to work with, and he signed with the Stones, and he worked with the Stones and helping them with record deals, I believe. Now, a little caveat here, I may make a lot of mistakes with the Stones, and I'm sure there's people that know a lot more of the details, so feel free to write. Don't chastise me, just write them down there if I misspoke. If I misspeak. Misspoke would be past tense, but by the time you see this, I would have misspoke instead of misspeak. So, one day, the Stones, Andrew says, you guys need to write songs. And the Stones didn't write fucking songs. They just covered, you know, R&B, bluesy stuff, really well, mind you. But the Beatles and the Stones, there's always this little rivalry there. But one day, on a break, they're in the studio trying to record something, the Stones, and Andrew goes out for a coffee and a cigarette and a little break, and he just happens to run into the Beatles, run into John and Paul, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, getting out of a taxi after they were at some luncheon, and he ran into them, and they knew him from him working with Brian Epstein, and they knew they worked with the Stones. And he said, "You were trying to do some things, and we're having a rough time. Do you got anything?" Because they needed some songs. They needed a hit single. Stones hadn't had a hit single yet. So the Stones are in the studio recording. Andrew brings back Lennon and McCartney, and that had a half song written, "I Want to Be Your Man," and they play a little bit for the Stones, and they kind of like it. They think it's a good thing. But it wasn't finished. There was no middle section, and so the Lennon and McCartney literally go in the corner of the studio, and right in front of the Stones, more or less, finish writing "I Want to Be Your Man" and give it to the Stones right there, like 10 minutes, new song. The Stones record it, "I Want to Be Your Man." John Lennon didn't really like the song anyway. He says, "I'm not going to fucking give the Stones one of our great songs. This is a song that they gave away to Ringo for With the Beatles." So this was the end of '63. I'm blanking on my years now. Did I screw that up? Yeah, November '63. I went backwards and forwards, so a little out of order here. Apologize. "I Want to Be Your Man" hits and tops out at number 12 in the UK. Not bad. First Stones hit. Written by the Beatles, written by Lennon and McCartney. So anyway, the Stones finally start writing songs. So we're in 1964, and that first album comes out. In 1965, in January, the Stones put out Rolling Stones #2. No friggin' originals. 1965. Meanwhile, the Beatles put out Help, which is the first Beatle record with all originals, no covers. And they put out Rubber Soul. The Stones in 1965, in September, put out Out of Our Heads. And finally, not only do they have originals, not Play With Fire, they have The Last Time, which is a great, great single, but they put out, finally, one of the best singles of the 1960s, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Satisfaction is on this song. They also do The Spider and the Fly, One More Try, and that's it. So they have 4 originals. This comes out in November, right? Am I right here? September. The Beatles put this out in December. So, not exactly the same, but there you go. This is hard to juggle. This is hard to juggle, the Beatles and the Stones. 1966 comes along. The Beatles put out one album, Revolver. The Stones put out, which I consider one of their best albums. If I can find it here. My records are out of order. I might be showing the wrong versions of some of these. Okay. Some of these are UK, some of these are American, because in the mono box here, because they have both versions. So this is the UK Aftermath. The Stones put out Aftermath, 1966, April 1966. On here, Mother's Little Helper, Stupid Girl, Lady Jane, Under My Thumb. This is where the Stones really start shining as songwriters. Okay, 1967. Sgt. Pepper, June 1967. An amazing record. One of the most important records of the 60s. Photography, or the design concept by the great British artist Peter Blake. Photographer Michael Cooper. You know it, I don't need to show any more of it. 1967. In July, the Beatles in July put out All You Need Is Love, this song for the world, the first worldwide satellite feed, and the Beatles represented the UK. Mick Jagger is in the audience. If you've seen the video of that, he's there singing Love, Love, All You Need Is Love in the end, like everyone else. The Stones put out a single. They go in the studio and they're working on a single. We Love You. Is We Love You an answer to All You Need Is Love? They're working on the song. They're having problems with the song. They need a little fix. Lennon and McCartney show up at the studio. Lennon and McCartney sing the background vocals and actually write a little bit of the backgrounds. They're mixed down, but you can hear them in the backgrounds of this. So Lennon and McCartney helped the Stones sort of finish off the song somewhat, at least the production of a record. Again, produced by Andrew Luke Oldham. See a pattern here? And then they put out a single from their album, The album, their Satanic Majesty's Request. Oh, before that, before Sgt. Pepper, in January of 1967, Stones put out, which an album that I really love, one of my favorites, Between the Buttons. Yesterday's Paper, My Obsession, Backstreet Girl, Connection, Cool, Calm, Collected, Complicated, Something Happened to Me, Mrs. Amanda Jones, again produced by Andrew Loog Oldham. Now, remember, this came out after this and several other albums. And look, their name isn't on the cover. It's really tiny. Rubber Soul was like considered the first album of a pop band without their name on the cover of the album. So, but anyway, later that year, they put out this, Satanic Majesty's Request. The Stones stab at psychedelia. A lot of Stones fans and critics hated it. I actually like it as a Beatle fan. A lot of Beatle fans liked it because it was like the cover. What an original concept. A cover designed by British artist Peter Blake. A cover photographed by British photographer Michael Cooper. And the great single, She's a Rainbow, backed with 20 light years from home. Now let me grab, I probably should grab, you all know it, you all seen it, most of you have it. The lenticular cover, this is the original copy, one of my original copies with that cover. And it's hard to see on this version. It's easier to see two of them on the non-3D version. But Lennon and McCartney, their faces of all four Beatles actually, are in here, hidden in the cover. And going back to Sgt. Pepper, there's a bit here, somewhere here, it says, "We love you, Rolling Stones." So, any similarity, it's just coincidental. Of course, the end of '67, the Beatles put out this great, it was an EP in the UK, Magical Mystery Tour, probably their biggest failure, doing the film Magical Mystery Tour, sort of clowning around, dressed up costumes. In America, they issued this as an LP, which has songs from the film and a side B of all the singles at the time, Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, Baby Rich Man, and you know the rest, All You Need Is Love, etc. Of course, it wouldn't be for another year until the Stones make a film that's less successful and everyone dresses up, and that's Rock and Roll Circus. Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. No coincidence, and a year too late, passé. They're dressing up circus gear. You got Taj Mahal, Jethro Tull, The Who. You got John Lennon and Yoko Ono as the Plastic Mac, with Eric Clapton and the Dirty Mac, playing Your Blues, and with Keith Richards on guitar as well. So, coincidence? A year later? There was no rivalry at all. Now, as we continue here. So, 1968 happens, and of course, Beatles start Apple Records, their own label. You know the story, you know the label. The first single on Apple Records is Hey Jude, backed with Revolution. So, I think it was in February, my dates might be wrong. Mick Jagger's, there's a birthday party for Mick Jagger at I think it's called the Vesuvio Club in London, kind of a posh, cool place, and it was a private club. And while they're at that party, Mick Jagger and the Stones preview to the partygoers the music for Beggar's Banquet. Sympathy of the Devil, Fortune Teller. Oh, excuse me, this is not. Oh, this is Stray Cats. Wrong, wrong. Well, this isn't the gatefold one. This is a later Decca color vinyl from the 70s. But this album, and Sympathy for the Devil, No Expectations, Dear Doctor, Parachute Woman, Street Fighting Man, great song, Salt of the Earth. I mean, anyway, you know this album. Great friggin' album. They play it at the party. McCartney comes strolling into the party, and the DJ is playing this record. And when it's over, McCartney hands the DJ at the party an acetate of the next Beatles single. So he puts it on, and it's Hey Jude. And the audience, it just builds up at the end. You know the song. The audience, kind of the partygoers, like really like it. I think Mick Jagger is pissing his pants at this point. What a wanker, McCartney. Come on, it's someone else's party. And of course, then they flip it over, and John Lennon screams out of the speakers, is singing the fast version of Revolution. There's no rivalry here. The Beatles and the Stones, they actually always tried to not release records at the same time. They always tried to space them out. They just kind of gave each other hints about that. So they actually hung out. They were friends. But that's kind of a wanky move on Paul's part, in my opinion. This is what was going to be the cover. It ended up not being the cover for obvious reasons in 1968. Later to be released in different versions of anniversary editions and in the monobox here for Rolling Stones from 1968. Then, of course, in December, the Beatles release the White Album. Don't need to show that. So, that is, and then 68, and then 69, okay, 69 gets complicated. The Beatles put out Yellow Submarine, Don't Need to Show, which is the soundtrack, which has only 4 new songs, some comps. I love the score from George Martin on that. That's in 1969. In September of that year, the Beatles issue, which some people think is their best album, Abbey Road. Do I need to show you the cover of Abbey Road? It's stereo, so it's not in the monobox. You know the cover of Abbey Road. But then the Stones put out in December of that year, Let It Bleed. I've always loved the Stones. Let It Bleed and Beggar's Banquet are amongst my favorites. This is an amazing record. In a way, even though the Beatles in 1970 put out Let It Be, in a way, people kind of knew the Beatles were sort of imploding and things like that. But, you know, I think after this record, the slogan came along about the Stones were the greatest rock and roll band in the world. And I'll continue. Hold that thought. Okay, just to recap, going back to the 60s, these are a few of the other American and British comps and things that came out, just different covers. These are from the monobox of the Stones. I might throw them in just to give you an idea. 12 by 5, again, all covers. Flowers, one of my favorite, kind of a comp that has Ruby Tuesday, which I think is one of the best songs they ever wrote early on. One of their best early songs. Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, Standing in the Shadow? Let's Spend the Night Together. Lady Jane. So at least when they started writing, they kind of hit the ground running. Just took them a little, it really took them a little nudge from John and Paul to get going. Now, Rolling Stones Now, December's Children. These were from American versions. Some of these recorded in America, unlike the Beatles that never recorded in America back in the day. So the Beatles put out 1970 Let It Be. You all know that story. You can go to countless Beatles sites, read countless Beatle books, millions of Beatle books, millions of Beatle sites, millions of people pontificating on the good, bad, and the ugly of Let It Be and the Get Back session. So the Beatles are gone. So you know what that means? You know what that means can happen now? The Rolling Stones can be the greatest rock and roll band in the world by default. They can create a logo and an identity. These are some APCO. These are actually 2 boxes that came out, I'm thinking 12 years ago, 13 years ago. What year did these come out? Is there a date on them? If you didn't know the Stones and their whole image, you would no idea this box set was the Rolling Stones. Anyway, this kind of gives it away. Actually, it's a pretty cool logo, I guess. Artsy. So, these 2 records box sets came out, and they cover the entire career. Mostly these are stereo boxes, and I'm going to go through the records I haven't gone through, just because, you know, the Stones, the Beatles are gone. Now the Stones can do whatever the fuck they want to do. And of course, as soon as they sign to their own label, part of Atlantic Records, they put out Sticky Fingers, one of the great rock and roll records of all time. Just a powerful, loose, drug-infused rock and roll record with a great cover. This is this reissue here without the zipper. Oh my God, that's disgusting. Talk about wanking. Sticky Fingers, great record. First on Rolling Stone Records. What can I say? The greatest rock and roll band by default. They actually started to be this great rock and roll band. Of course, 69, they Get Your Ya-Ya's out live. Now, talk about Beatles versus Stones again. I never saw the Stones. I mean, excuse me, I did see the Stones. I never saw the Beatles. That's a whole other story. If you watch my videos, you know the reason and the antidote about that story. But I did see the Stones about 5 times. First in 1969, Oakland Coliseum. Then I saw them at Altamont. And then I saw them in 1972, Winterland. That's the double album tour, which we'll get to in a minute. What's it called? XL on Main Street tour. And then I saw them several times, 2 more times in the 70s and once in the 80s. So I guess I saw them 6 times, give or take. Might be one I'm missing. But I'm just gonna go through these records. A couple good comps, you know, going back a little bit. They did put out a couple great comps. The first one, High Tides in Green Grass. This was the American cover. And then UK cover. And this had all their early hits. Really great comp. Great comp. Remember, they're the greatest band now by default. Through the Past Darkly, the later hits. Ethan Russell Photograph. I think I've discussed that before. A couple other EPs they did and records in the UK. I showed that. EP, the Rolling Stones. EP 5x5. Obviously the Beatles did did EPs in the 60s as well. So, now we're getting into, as I said, their own label. That XL on Main Street. Double album, another drug-infused, cocaine-infused. Was recorded in the south of France, I think, as I recall. You know, actually I like this album. Angie, it was a kind of hit. Some people didn't like it because it was a little too mellow, but I don't love it, but I like this album. Guy Pillard, who did Rock Legends book, Is that the new Rock Icons illustration? Did the cover for this. He also did the Bowie's Diamond Dogs illustration cover. Rock Stars, Rock, what's the name of that book? Blanking out the name of it. Rock Dreams. Rock Dreams. Great artist. It's only rock and roll, but I like it. This is one of my favorite. I think Hiro, the Japanese photographer, might have photographed this cover. I'm just coming out of memory. I don't remember exactly. I do like this record. I think it has a great sound. I think if there is a record that is not at the peak of people's, Hiro did a photograph, Hiro, not at the peak of people's favorites. I love Billy Preston's piano playing on this, especially on the track Melody. But this is a great record. It's kind of funky. It's just kind of loose, but really has a great groove to it, I think. Really good. Black and Blue. Then there's Start Me Up. That's the song that I think Mick and the boys were able to sell to Microsoft for one of their Windows releases. Start Me Up for something like $5 million. Not a bad payday. Hang Fire, Slave, Black Limousine, Waiting on a Friend. That's a great, great, great song. Very Santana-like guitar playing in that, I think, but I really like it. You know, Mick Jagger's on some of those, Mick Taylor on some of those early songs. 1978. I have also in my collection on my wall here, I'm not pulling out now, the original of this. They had to change, there was a pull-out, and they had to change the covers because some of the celebrities, they didn't get permission from the celebrities on this. But really good record. Girl with the Faraway Eyes, Respectable, Beast of Burden, Shattered, Miss You, a little disco, The Whip Comes Down, their disco thing. Some people didn't like Miss You, but there's a great long version of it, and I think it works for the time. And you know, the Stones knew how to kind of fit in to the whole genre at the time. Sometimes they did it and it worked, and sometimes it was something they shouldn't have done. They should have left all alone, in my opinion. In a way, that's, you know, the thing about the Beatles breaking up in 1970 was that old showbiz adage, leave the audience wanting more. And I've seen some videos here about groups you like and everything, and all about the Beatles getting back together again. Would they have done that? I'm so, as a big Beatle fan, I'm so thankful they never did. You know, that's why to this day, you know, they still got this finite time period. Oh, should I be talking with them? This finite time period where all is good and all is wonderful. It's a perfect bookend. It's from 1962, 63 to 1970, into the 60s. And that was the end of the Beatles, where the Stones had to live on for, what, 4 decades, 5 decades? Another one I kind of like, Summer Romance, Emotional Rescue. That's kind of a funky song. It's kind of swampy and everything. Like this record. Undercover the Night, a couple good bits. Undercover the Night, I actually like that song. You know, this is one of those records you can put on like decades later, and it's fun just to, you know, vacuum your house to. So that's good if you have whether it's a Hoover upright, a Hoover low right, a handheld vacuum, or a fancy schmancy Dyson. You can use that record for it. Their Dayglow period, disco-y, Harlem. Actually, I like their version of Harlem Shuffle. There's a great video for that. Is that the animated one, I believe? You know, the thing is, Dirty Work is on here. All their records have at least 1 or 2 great songs. And I kept buying all their records, so I pretty much have everything. Steel Wheels is probably my least favorite. This is, I think, the last tour of the Stones. I think I saw the Steel Wheels tour. Is this the one that Don Was first produced? Am I right on that? I don't remember. Does it matter? Do you really care? Do you care? He did some of these. Voodoo Lounge is better than Steel Wheel. Love is Strong. Oh, that's a great. So see, they always had great singles on these records. I'd say as a whole, maybe certain things didn't work, but Love is Strong was really great. God. Brand New Car, Sweetheart Together, you know. It has moments. You know, how many ways can we show our logo? Now that's branding. They got to be such a branding machine there. Bridge to Babylon, not great either. Yeah, produced by Don Was and the Glimmer Twins. You know, the Glimmer Twins are Mick and Keith. Bigger Bang. Is that what it's called? Rolling Stones' Bigger Bang, yeah. Someone's gonna like it. I mean, again, put it on. This is a good one. This is actually a great record to vacuum when you have someone else vacuuming your house and you're out to dinner, or you're out in the park, or you're out at a concert. So put this on when you're not at home and you'll love it. So, let me stop this one moment. I'll be right back. I know I'm missing some. Obviously, I'm missing a lot of the comps, like Suckin' in the 70s, but you know, the Stones weren't only sucking in the 70s. They were sucking in the 80s. The Stones were sucking in the 90s. The Stones are sucking, but they're still great live. So, and I love the Stones. I forgot about this one. Oh, I already did that. I did this one. Undercover for the Night? Yeah, of course I did. She Was Hot. That's a good song, actually. This is my original copy. So I do have some of these records duplicate. Their last album, Don Was, great performance. I think the sound sucks. I think this is mastered really badly. That's just a personal thing. But I love the music, and I love that they kind of did a blues record. I think they should get in the friggin' studio with someone like Rick Rubin and really strip themselves down. I'm not showing CDs on this particular video, but there was a great CD, kind of a stripped, that's what it's called. And there's a great version of Like a Rolling Stone, the Dylan song. But again, I think another Don Was production. And again, let's brand ourselves and let's stick our tongue at our audience. Right? We love the Stones. But at least they have the Stones. Hey, the Stones were very talented. They're also lucky. They didn't have 40 years of the Beatles anymore to deal with. This is actually cool. This is from On the Air. This is the BBC stuff, I believe. Yeah, BBC recording, On the Air. I quite like this. This was issued, was it 10 years ago, 20 years ago on CD? Just on vinyl last few years. So, that's the Beatles versus the Stones, or Beatles v. Stones, as they call it, in that famous case dated 1970, Supreme Court decision, Beatles v. Stones. I kid, okay? And I love the Rolling Stones. So this is a very biased video. Can you imagine if we had 40 years more Beatle records? I don't think it would have been a good idea, and I don't care, as much as I love the Beatles, I don't think they would have lasted 40 years with the quality of product. I think they could have done it another maybe 5 years. They needed each other. As much as I love their solo stuff, they needed each other just to kind of kick themselves in the ass and say, no, you're not going to sing silly love songs. No, you're not going to sing My Salamander, Paul. And John, oh, Powa Kawa, Pose Pose. No, you're not going to say that. So, the Beatles versus the Stones. I love them both. You know, I should have mentioned early on with the Stones, Brian Jones. Brian Jones is the one that kind of, you know, the Stones and the Beatles did befriend each other. And at the end of this, there's going to be a few images I think I'll post of their friendships together and their little bit of rivalries and stuff. But Brian Jones had a thing that almost didn't fit. And lastly, I'll say, the Beatles were a tight band. They were almost like, you know, the four-headed monster in a way. They were all tight together, even though Lennon McCartney wrote the bulk, and then George, and then Ringo subsequently. They were really a tight-knit group. Where the Stones, aside from Jagger and Richard, were almost like individuals. They all had their individual, just the way they went on, the way they kind of, never thought of them. It was always like there was a lead singer, Mick. The Beatles didn't have a lead singer. They didn't have one spokesman, although in the early years, you know, John really spoke, and then Paul. So, I mean, I could go on to that. You could write a whole thesis about the Beatles versus the Stones. In fact, for further reading, read John Macmillan Presents Beatles versus the Stones. Really good book. Very interesting. It goes just beyond the surface. I read this when it came out. It came out in 2013. I skimmed it again a little bit for this video. The story of the greatest rivalry in rock, the Beatles Stones. So you can tell me if you're a Beatles or Stones fan. You know, I won't hold it against you. Being a Stones fan first, you're wrong, but I won't hold it against you. Take care. Mazzy loves you. Jai Guru Deva Om.